Bonus tip: Anecdotes. Personal stories as evidence. In this bonus video, we will explore how to effectively use anecdotes as evidence to support your points and make your arguments more persuasive. Anecdotes are personal stories used to illustrate a point. They can be powerful tools in discussions and debates because they provide a relatable, human element to the conversation. Anecdotes can come from personal experience or from someone else's, and they can be used to support or refute an argument. However, it's important to remember that anecdotes are not always representative of the broader population and can be subject to bias and misinterpretation. To effectively use anecdotes in your arguments, keep these tips in mind. 1. Use anecdotes sparingly to avoid overpowering your argument with personal opinion. 2. Use anecdotes that are relevant to the topic of discussion. 3. Consider the source of the anecdote and whether it's reliable. 4. Clarify the context of the anecdote to avoid misinterpretation. 5. Clearly connect the anecdote to your argument, showing how it supports your point. Now, let's see an example of how to use anecdotes effectively in a discussion or debate. Imagine you're discussing the importance of investing in public education. You could present an anecdote about a teacher who inspired you or a family member's positive experience with a public school, demonstrating the impact of public education on individuals and society. When using anecdotes as evidence in discussion and debates, it's important to choose relevant and compelling stories that support your argument. Here are 3 commonly used structures, along with examples of sentences using them. I know someone who. This structure is useful when you have a personal connection to the anecdote. For example, I know someone who dropped out of high school but turned their life around after attending a community college, proving that access to education can change lives. There was a time when. This structure is useful for setting the scene and establishing context. For example, there was a time when students with disabilities were not provided with the necessary accommodations in schools. But after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, these students were finally given equal access to education. In a recent news story I read about, this structure is useful when you want to use a third-party source to add credibility to your anecdote. For example, in a recent news story, I read about a school district that implemented a new literacy program and saw a significant increase in student reading levels. In summary, anecdotes are brief, personal stories or accounts of events that are used to illustrate a point or support an argument. They are often used in discussions and debates because they can help make a point more relatable and memorable. However, when using anecdotes in discussions and debates, it is important to use them effectively. Here's a checklist for effectively using anecdotes. 1. Choose relevant anecdotes that are appropriate to the topic and clearly illustrate the points you want to make. 2. Provide enough background information on the anecdote to allow your audience to understand the context and importance of the story. 3. Clearly identify the key points of the anecdote that are relevant to your argument. 4. Use the anecdote to support your argument, but do not rely solely on it as evidence. 5. Acknowledge any potential criticisms or weaknesses of the anecdote. 6. Explain how the anecdote supports your argument and why it is important. 7. Use multiple anecdotes to reinforce your argument, if appropriate. Anecdotes can be an effective tool in discussions and debates, adding a relatable and memorable element to your argument. To utilize anecdotes successfully, ensure they are relevant, provide sufficient context, emphasize key points, and support your argument without solely relying on them. Additionally, acknowledge any potential criticisms and weaknesses, and consider using multiple anecdotes if appropriate. By thoughtfully incorporating anecdotes as supporting evidence, you can create a more engaging, persuasive, and memorable argument for your audience.